Okay, so I'm making this video because I am a person who wanted to do a particular thing. And for a long time, no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find a way to do it. And recently, I saw somebody's post and I put some extra, I basically went from what they did and did a little bit more work and got the same idea to work for myself. And now that I have done that, I want to put this out there so that anybody who's trying to do this thing can also do it. Now what that thing is packaging up an RShiny application as an executable. I want to take a moment to put some disclaimers and some thoughts in place before I get into it. I think point number one, and I want to be very clear about this, I am not a computer scientist, I am not a software developer. I am probably going to say, do, whatever, something in this video that will rub some of those people the wrong way. If that is you, I apologize, but I am not an expert on everything. I'm not perfect. I just was a particular person with a particular problem that I wanted to solve, and this is me doing the best I can to share a kind of solution. So that's that out of the way. I may come back and make a similar point again, just to be very clear. But the next thing I want to address is basically whether or not doing this is a good idea. I think that there are many ways to deploy a Shiny-like application. First of all, if you are doing RShiny, you have multiple deployment options that are not kind of doing an EXE style application. You can do shinyapps.io, which is, basically hosting it online, and there are, multiple tiers of that can get more supported and more professional. You can do, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but I'll probably link everything in the description. Shiny, it's like Shiny Server or whatever it is. It's basically getting it hosted professionally by Posit, and then that's a paid subscription, I think. And then you also have the option of basically hosting it yourself. So setting up your own Linux server to host the application. Obviously, you'll be handling all of the resources. You'll be doing everything. So if you have the expertise to do that, then probably for a person with that expertise and with the resources, that's probably the best way to host something, like a Shiny-like application. But also that's probably the most work. Those options all exist. And those are going to be, I think, in many ways, for many, many use cases, and again, I'm not the person to speak to all of this. Like I said, I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not a developer. Also, I'm not like an IT person, I'm not a application architecture person, not any of that. So I'm not going to be able to speak to all the details here, but probably, for most use cases, one of those options is going to be a better way to quote-unquote deploy an RShiny application. So that's that piece. Next piece is if you're going the route that I'm going to go in this video, you could deploy using, and I'll speak to this a bit more later, but you could use Python to create the app. So you could do, I think the options right now are Python Shiny, which is kind of a newer, they've been, I think it just recently came out of beta, but I could be wrong about that. But Python Shiny is an option, and that's going to feel very familiar as well if you're used to RShiny. And then also Panel, or Panels, or whatever it's called, which is my impression as an outsider, I don't do a lot of Python. I'm mainly an R programmer. But from my understanding, if you're a Python developer, Panel is probably a better way to go than Shiny. But I could be wrong about that, but that's just from doing some light reading on the topic. That was the impression I got. But you have two options. So if you're incorporating Python into the workflow, you already have some Python options, and Python will be involved in this process. So I want to address that as well, and I'll speak a little bit more to that later. With all of that being said, if you've heard that and you still are saying, I want it to be R Shiny for whatever reason, or you need it to be, I don't want to look at a Python way of doing it, and it needs to be an executable app. I don't want to host it anywhere. I want it to be an executable. I have found myself in that position where that was going to be the easiest way for me to do a certain thing, and that's why I went down this rabbit hole. So I understand being in that position, and now let me show you how you can do it, and in a way that I think is actually quite painless. And it's using PyInstaller. So PyInstaller is just a module for Python that lets you package up Python code into executables. And all we're basically going to do is use PyInstaller to make an executable that runs a piece of Python code that sources an R file. And so if I come over here, really what we need to have set up for this, we need to have a browser of some kind. I'm using Mozilla. You could use Chrome. You could use something else. It just needs to be a browser that can, we're going to run the Shiny application in that browser. So when you run a Shiny app, you have an option of launching it in a browser, and that's what we're going to do. And the reason for that is because we want it to be all self-contained. We want this executable to be fully self-contained. It doesn't matter whether the end user has a browser installed or what browser they have installed, anything like that, right? So I have a Mozilla install sitting in this PyInstaller Shiny folder where we're going to kind of have all of our working materials. I have an R installation. That's a full R installation. And so just to briefly address this point, you're probably thinking, wow, so this executable has to have a full browser install and a full R install inside it? Yes. Is that ideal? No, probably not. That's going to make the executable kind of big. And from what I can tell, the way that these executables work is whenever it runs, it has to create a temp directory that it moves all of its files into. And so you'll notice when we actually finally get through this and run this application, it has a non-negligible startup time, like probably a 30-second to a minute startup time to run. Is that ideal? No. But again, if you really need to have a way to do this thing, to me, for my use case that I use this for, 30 seconds, a minute, that was acceptable. The difference between not being able to do a thing and being able to do a thing but there's some minor drawbacks that's basically an infinite difference in my mind. So is it ideal? No. But it's how it works. At least that's how I've been able to get it to work. And another asterisk to put on all of this is, I bet somebody watching this is going to see how I have this set up and see 10 ways to make it better than what I have here. If you see it, excellent. Spread that information. Let me and everybody else know all the ways that this can be better. Again, I just want to get this out there so that people have a way to do it. And if the immediate aftermath of that is a bunch of people saying a bunch of ways to do this even better, fantastic. And again, I do not claim to be an expert on this sort of thing. Okay, we have the Mozilla install, we have the R install, and now we need to, another quick note on the R install, whatever package dependencies your app has, that needs to be in this R install. So the library folder in this R installation needs to have all of your required packages installed. Now, if you're trying to optimize right? In terms of the size of these, right? Probably the R-install, you want to have the bare minimum packages that you need for your app to run. And the browser install, you might want to be the most lightweight browser that you can find that always works, right? So if you can have a lightweight browser and as light an R-install as is required for the app to run, that's probably going to, it'll be a smaller executable. I would expect it to start up a bit faster because the amount of files it has to move is less. So those are things to probably bear in mind. Now we also have this PyInstaller Python file and R file. So just to look at these, the Python file, we're using, and so this is code. So again, I'll link the Stack Overflow post where I saw somebody who basically laid the framework for what I'm doing here. A lot of this code straight from them. So I take no credit for this. Again, I'm not very good at coding in Python. I just haven't done a lot of it. So full credit to them. I'll link their post. And I've pretty much taken this from them. But the gist of it is, this is really just getting the path information for sort of the internal directory structure. We're saying, okay, this is the path to the R script that we're going to run. This is a path to the R script executable in the R installation. And then we're using subprocess to essentially just source that R file. So we're going to use the rscript.exe to run the script. And this is essentially like a command shell call. But it's quite simple, right? We're basically just, all we're doing is, where's the R script executable? Where's the R script that we're going to run? Go run the R script. That's really all that's happening here. Then in the R application, so here I don't actually know if this set working directory, I haven't actually tested this. This set working directory might not be necessary. I think the idea behind it is just to make sure that if I don't actually know if this is necessary. There are some places where, for example, here, this firefox.exe, that will end up in the same directory as the R install. So it may be necessary to make sure that R is basically set to the correct directory, which is basically the internal directory of the executable. I haven't actually tested whether it will automatically be set to that directory. So this might not be necessary. Should I have tested this before I did the video? Yeah, probably. But you know what? Y'all can figure it out. This makes sure that you're in the kind of the internal EXE directory structure. So this is just setting kind of a global R option for the browser to be firefox.exe. That is the Firefox executable that will end up in that internal directory. We're loading the file, the libraries that we need. And this is just the kind of standard histogram demo app that you could find if you went and looked up, RShiny app, and you went to kind of the official RShiny tutorial. This is one of the first apps that you'd see. So it's taken straight from there. So this isn't an app I made. This is a very standard introductory basic Shiny application. And we're creating our UI, we're creating our server, and then we're just running Shiny app, right? And so really, in practice, you would replace this code with whatever code you want it to run. So whatever code you want your executable to run, whether it's a Shiny app or it could even not be a Shiny app, it could be some R code that you want to run, right? This could literally be anything. This could be any R code, whatever you want to run it here. And what this will end up doing is we'll end up running the Shiny app, and we're going to, it's important that we have options list launch browser is true, because that's going to use firefox.exe to run the application. But so here, the Python file, we're basically just saying, hey, this is where R is, this is where the script is, run the script. And then in our script, it's whatever code you want the script to run. And in this case, we're having it run a Shiny app, and we want it to And the key point is to specify that it uses that Firefox or whatever your browser is executable to launch the app, right? So that's all that we have here and here. The rest of the magic happens with PyInstaller. So coming down to this code, right, and this is just PowerShell, right? So I'm just in VS Code, in PowerShell, run PyInstaller. This is telling it what Python script it's kind of wrapping up in the what Python script the executable will run. Then you need to use this add data. We're going to add the R script. This, and there's just some syntax here. I'm not a PyInstaller expert. I just know this is how it needs to be. You need to have this semicolon and this period with the kind of add data calls. So we're this is adding in the R script. This is adding in the R installation. This is adding in the Firefox installation. And then this one file is important. That's going to, if you don't do that, it won't end up having the internal files inside the executable. So if you want it to truly be a one file executable, you need to use this one file command. And so if we run that, the result will be, okay, so we've run the executable, we've run PyInstaller, and now you can see over here, it's created some folders. So it's created this spec file. Again, I'm not a PyInstaller expert, but if you look into PyInstaller, you get familiar with it. There's things you can do with the spec file. You get this build folder, you get this dist folder. What we really care about is the dist folder, and in particular, this executable. This is the executable that we want. And now let me show you basically how it works. So we run this. It pops up this Python terminal, essentially, and we'll end up getting, the way I have it set up here, the R terminal, or the R console, everything will get written here. So now you can see that the script, the app is running, and it should, sure enough, pop up Firefox, right? And you can see here's our app. So this is basically all there is to it. And you will get, this will function as your R console. So whatever would normally show up in your console when you're running the app, say in RStudio or VS Code or whatever, it's going to pop up in this window. Which can be useful, right, if you want to see the R output. But you could change that if you wanted to, send it to a sync instead, or whatever you wanted to do, you could do. But kind of the way I have this set up by default, it's just going to show you the console output here. In terms of whether you can hide this window, if that's something you want to do, I think that there might, you'd have to look into it. I haven't looked into it. I haven't been too worried about hiding this window, but I think that would be a general PyInstaller question. Like in PyInstaller, can you hide this console window? I'm not sure. But you could see there was a little bit of startup time to that, right? It wasn't immediate, but it's not horrible. And especially if you just want to have something that works, it'll work. And yeah, the app works just like you'd expect it to. And obviously this could work for a much more complex app. It could really, again, basically it can run whatever R code you put in that script. But yeah, that's basically it. Very simple, right? You set up the R installation, you set up a browser installation, you set up your Python script, which was that simple script you saw, you set up whatever R script you want to run, you run the PyInstaller command that I showed, it'll create this executable, run this executable, it'll run an app for you. Another quick note is if you're on different operating systems, I believe, and again I could be getting some details wrong, but I believe PyInstaller is OS specific. So if you say wanted to make an executable for a Mac user, you would need to run PyInstaller in Mac OS. If you wanted to create it for a Linux user, you'd need to run PyInstaller in whatever, I don't know if it's distro dependent for Linux. Again, you have to look into it. I don't know. But at the very least, it would need to be run in a Linux distro. Maybe it would be distro specific. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about how Linux works. But yeah, that's really the long and the short of it. So hopefully this is helpful for somebody. Again, to go back to the beginning, I think probably for most use cases, this isn't an ideal solution, but it is a solution. And if this is the exact thing you're trying to do, this is a way to do it. So hopefully it helps somebody out there.